All right, good afternoon, everybody. I think I said good morning earlier. I don't, working from home is wild. But good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. I see everyone introducing themselves in the chat. So good to see everybody. And I see folks already coming on camera. If you feel comfortable, we'd love to see you. And go ahead and keep introducing yourselves. So before we get started, we are going to do a little bit of Zoom housekeeping, just to kind of get familiar with what we're going to be doing today. I know everyone's pretty much a Zoom expert by now, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If you have any questions around Zoom, or if you're having any issues, we highly recommend you going to our Zoom guide that you can find on our website. The link is right there. We are going to be using the chat feature throughout the session, but I honestly think we have a big enough crowd that if you feel comfortable using the chat, please feel free to. But we also encourage you just to come off mute and ask questions, add to the discussion. We'd love to hear you. We'd love for this session to be discussion based. So if you feel comfortable using the chat, like I said, go ahead. But also if you want to send a private message or ask a question privately on that chat message function, you can do a drop-down menu and select either myself, Deirdre, Rena, or Anna, anyone from the Nonprofit Center to ask the question on your behalf privately. We also highly recommend that if you feel comfortable with it, go ahead and rename yourself on the session. You can see actually my rename here. I went ahead and added my pronouns. If you'd like to do this, if you go to the participants list, next to your name, there's a drop-down menu and you can rename yourself there. And we highly recommend doing this so that everyone feels welcome and included in our programming. So welcome to the first session in the Jessie Advocacy series around our repositioning for strength. This is the updated version that we did back in 2020. Just a kind of overlook of how not just COVID-19 has impacted the nonprofit sector, but we also are going to be diving into some other research and surveys that we've done in the past. And your hosts are going to be Rena Coughlin, our fearless leader at the Nonprofit Center, and myself. I hope that you're familiar with both of us. If you're not, we'll have some opportunities later for contact information. And just a little bit of who we are at the Nonprofit Center. Everything that you see listed here are resources that we provide to the sector. Obviously, because of COVID-19, we've had to adjust just like everybody else. So if you have any questions about whether or not we still offer a specific resource or what it looks like now, please feel free to reach out to me or any other team member at the Nonprofit Center, as well as definitely visit our website at nonprofitctr.org. There's a lot of information, not just about upcoming programming, our job bank, our board bank, but also our COVID-19 resource platform. So the Jessie Advocacy series is a new program that is actually an extension of a partnership that the Nonprofit Center has been a part of for now 6 years. Longer. The Nonprofit Center has been involved with the what is now called the Jessie, but is longer named the Jessie Ball DuPont Center in downtown Jacksonville. We've been a part of that partnership for a really long time, and this year it's really grown into an opportunity for us to use our resources and knowledge around local issues impacting the nonprofit sector and really elevating the Jessie as a place for community conversations and for the sector to engage in those conversations. So we're really looking forward to this. And this is the first out of 4 for this series. So a little bit about our Stronger Nonprofits framework. I hope everyone is very knowledgeable with this already. If you're not, we do have a whole website on our, a whole page on our website about the framework. The Stronger Nonprofits framework is really kind of our theory or approach to capacity building. And it outlines the 4 pillars that we think are foundational for nonprofits to focus on around capacity building. And for this session today, it obviously falls under External Awareness and Advocacy, that pillar all the way to the right. So again, if you have any questions around the framework and kind of how it ties into the rest of our programming, we try to really have all of our resources and programming be directly informed by these pillars. So today we're going to spend some time, as I mentioned, going over a lot of data and kind of looking at how it's not just impacted the sector this past year, but also how we are forecasting it to impact the sector going forward. But we're also going to have some time for discussion. As I mentioned earlier, we really want this to be a discussion-based conversation. So please don't wait until we explicitly ask you for a question to pipe in if you have anything to add or any questions. And then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned, I think we have enough folks on here to go ahead and come off mute and introduce yourself. I would just love to hear your name, your organization, your role, and what brought you here today. And to make it easy on everyone, I'm gonna just call on you and ask you to unmute. If you don't feel comfortable, if there's no way for you to do it, just kind of wave or put it in the chat that you can't. So I'm just gonna start off with Richard Naylor. You're first on my list on this.
Woohoo! Richard Naylor, I'm the Director of Business Operations from the Tom Coughlin J Fund. And I saw in the chat, and I stole the statement, I think Ashley Scott said it maybe, that curiosity brought me here. So that's definitely true. And then also Kelly Coughlin, our CEO, really wanted to be part of this, but due to a scheduling conflict, she couldn't be here. So if you see my head down a lot, I'm taking copious notes. So thanks so much, though.
Thank you, Richard. Always a pleasure to have you here. Ashley F.
Hi, I'm Ashley Faladori. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the JAX Chamber, and also Curiosity. Love learning new things about wonderful organizations in our community. So just want to hear a little bit more about what's going on.
Awesome, thank you. Angela?
Hi, Angela Strain from We Care Jacksonville. I know that there's a saying, and I'm trying to remember it. Every time the door opens, I'm one of those people that will come and listen to the Nonprofit Center because every time I learn something new, and it's great to see everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Regina?
Hi, I'm Regina Gale Phillips. I'm with the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center in St. Augustine. And I'm here to, I would say the same reasons most of the others are here, to see what I can learn. And I always find out new information when I join in. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much, Regina. And now, I don't know if you know this, but Rena is our St. Johns County neighbor now too. So we've got a few folks in St. Augustine. So thank you for being here. Denise.
Hi, I'm Denise Reagan from the Garden Club of Jacksonville. So happy to see everybody and your faces today. I'd say, information is really important, in this age of, rededication to facts. But knowing how the sector has been affected by COVID just makes our organization stronger, because then we can be a better partner and ally to everybody out there.
Great point. Thank you, Denise. Joyce.
Good afternoon. I'm Joyce Marr. I'm the CEO for Betty Griffin Center in St. Augustine. And again, just like everybody else, curiosity, I love learning from the Nonprofit Center. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Joyce. Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Burns with Clarity Transitions. Great to see you all here.
Thanks, Julia. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Alford, CEO for Big Brothers Big Sisters Northeast Florida. Always a quest for learning, but then also we are winding down year 3 of our current strategic plan. And so I am on a reconnaissance mission to get as much current information as possible so I can lead us into our next strategic plan development.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Kenzie.
Hi, I'm Kenzie Crane. I'm with the Florida State University Foundation, but I live here in Jacksonville. And I'm happy to join you all. This is my first event with the Nonprofit Center of Northeast Florida. So I'm happy to meet you all.
Awesome. Welcome. Welcome. We'll do the induction ceremony later. Welcome. Lori. Oh, you're muted, Lori.
Can you hear me now? I had a Zoom crash. I apologize for having to re-enter. I'm Lori McMullen, Development Director with Aging True Community Senior Services, and still relatively new to the area again. And I just think this is an amazing resource. So,
awesome. Welcome, Lori. Thank you. Alita?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alita Turner, and I'm with Leadership Jacksonville as the Communications Coordinator, and Curiosity brought me here.
Awesome. Thank you, Alita. Lorianne?
Hi, everybody. Lorianne Whittington, CEO of Pine Castle, and I'm just here to keep up with the latest.
Thank you. Shannon?
Hi, all. Shannon Nasworth with Ability Housing. And I'm really interested in what the research has to say, especially as we're getting ready to enter session and knowing what the impacts are in our community.
Thank you, Shannon. Alexia?
Hi, everyone. Alexia Moss with Empowerment Resources, and the title alone sparked interest, and like others, just wanted to learn a little bit more.
Thank you. Raylan?
Hi, everyone. This is Raylan with the Duval COAD, which stands for Community Organizations Active in Disaster. And I always find these sessions with the Nonprofit Center so informative and helpful as we try to be responsive to the community's unmet needs.
Thank you, Raylan. Carolyn?
Hi, sorry about that. I'm also driving. My name's Carolyn. I'm with the PACE Center for Girls Clay, and I just really appreciate being able to get together with some of our nonprofits, and we are just constantly evolving and innovating over at PACE. So it's good to hear what others are doing too, to share ideas.
Thank you, Carolyn, and drive safely. Jamie Bucher?
Hi, close. It's Jamie Baker, but it's spelled wrong, so it's not your fault. I'm the Executive Director for Vision is Priceless, and I don't have anything different to add than what everybody else already brilliantly said.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. And I believe it's Bill Ferry?
Yes, there you go. Yeah, Bill Ferry, and I am a supporter of nonprofits for many years, whether through corporate support as well as membership on boards and other support. And I know the reason I'm here is Kim Govan invited me. So I just wanted to see what's going on, and maybe there's some ways that I can directly support some nonprofits in 2021.
Awesome. Happy to have you here. And Beth?
I'm Beth Mixon with Family Promise of Jacksonville. Like everyone else, a tremendous fan of the Nonprofit Center and all the work and workshops that you all, and information that you have shared, particularly during the last year. And I'm really hoping at the end that I will get my crystal ball for 2021.
We will try our best, definitely on that. And I think I got everybody. Oh, and I think I have Marcia. Marcia? It might be Marcia.
Marcia, I think you're on mute.
It's Marcia Hodgson with Circles Magazine and the Resident Community News. We try to cover the nonprofit sector very closely, both in our newspapers and our magazines. So I'm very interested in what you have to say here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcia. And I think that is everybody. No, it's not.
Amy Parker just joined us.
Amy, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the intro. I didn't have the link. Anyways, I'm Amy Parker with the Executive Director for the Reinhold Foundation over in Clay County. So looking forward to this meeting with you all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I think we're good now. Awesome. Okay. And I know that was a super long intro, a time for us to take, but I think it's really important for us to get a chance to hear from each other and connect when it's so rare. So I am going to pass it off to Rena to kick us off on the local landscape.
Thanks, Isis. And thank you guys all for being here today.
It's so great to see everyone's face, and I miss you guys. So what we're going to do today is some of you, I hope most of you, saw our Repositioning for Strength report that came out in this past summer of 2020. And that was the culmination of both surveying and what we called a working group of nonprofit managers and execs who came together and worked in small groups to help us really get a handle on lessons learned, big messages, big reveals, and gaps in resources that the pandemic had revealed to the nonprofit sector. And we combined that with a survey from the sector. Well, today we're going to update that information. So you'll see where we've taken the May and June data and sometimes added on data that you've provided us from the 2020 survey that we had in the field in the late fall that culminated in December, and key messages from folks updating what the nonprofit sector is really wanting to make sure is known in the community and known to each other about how the pandemic has changed the way we live, think, serve, and work. There's also cool information here. We have just conducted a benchmark survey of local philanthropy, and we had 19 local philanthropies take part, and they were telling us about what their priorities are, what their changes in work and giving have been since the pandemic. And the original intent of the survey, which it started pre-COVID, was to really get a handle on how the philanthropic community locally evaluates impact and what the difference is between the way nonprofits think about how they evaluate and consider measuring their own work and how the philanthropic community does the same, so that we can work towards more alignment around that issue, that very important issue. So let's dive in. We're going to start first with the updated survey information from the nonprofit sector. The first question we asked is, are you operating? And 77% of you are fully operational. Almost 30% are in fully 100% in person, and another 16% are fully 100% remote. And then there's another 33% that are in some sort of hybrid model of work. And 15% are partially open. There's a smaller percent that's not operational or has chosen some other category that is none of the above. But for the most part, the nonprofit sector message is we're here, we're working, and we're dealing with various operational challenges. So let's talk about what those operational challenges are. This infographic comes from our May and June survey of the nonprofit sector. And I'm not going to make you memorize this. Let's jump to December and I'll tell you the differences. How about that? So what we see that 6 months later, in December, you told us that 32% of you lost revenue due to a reduced demand for services. And that could be a reduced ability to deliver services, not just demand. And that's a 4% increase over the summer numbers. So there's continuing and increased impact on your revenue because you cannot be fully operational or in some way not able to deliver services. Then the 46% number next to it is a huge increase. It's a 15% increase over the summer for those who are telling us they're experiencing an increase in their demand for services. If we look down in the bottom left-hand corner, that 1/3 of nonprofits reporting difficulty operating in a virtual environment, that's a static number. It was 1/3 in May and it's 1/3 now. And that tells us a lot about how hard it has been and how difficult it is to harness the resources and the cultural changes required to make the leap
and have it work in your organization. The middle number there, 2 and 3, this is 75% of nonprofits tell us they've lost money due to canceled fundraisers. And I'm assuming all of us know, yeah, duh. But I think what's important to think about there is 2 things. One, there's a difference between small organizations and large organizations. When we parse this data and looked at organizations under $1 million, they were far more impacted by the cancellation of fundraisers than those organizations above $1 million. And when we think about fundraisers are normally a great source of unrestricted income, particularly for small organizations that may not have success in getting grants that cover their operating dollars, this could be a serious impact to their ability to operate. The 2 final graphs, the 21% and the 9 and 10 are in this topsy-turvy world. Good news. We've seen a slight decrease in the number of organizations from 28% to 21% who have laid off staff or cut hours. And then that final number, 9 and 10, that's the number of organizations that have accessed some kind of COVID relief. We know that many, many organizations have accessed PPP loans or the First Coast relief funds. So that's good news, and we'll see that play out in other numbers as we go forward. So let's look at a little more closely about where revenue impacts are being felt. Across the board, every kind of revenue, people are seeing some slight decreases to big decreases. The highest number of decrease people are registering is in donations or funding from businesses. And this makes complete sense, particularly when a lot of us are working with organizations and for-profit businesses that might have a social corporate responsibility arm that is reconfiguring or focusing its business on its own employees, or it's giving on immediate needs, or you've had to cancel your fundraiser and that was how you were accessing corporates or business dollars. Earned revenue is taking a huge hit, which again makes sense if you think about arts and culture organizations that may have been dependent on earned revenue, or some of us who are getting reimbursement dollars for services through a contract. Again, it makes sense, but it doesn't make it any less pleasant. So projected revenue, we asked execs, we said, tell us, how do you think you're going to end 2020? All organizations together averaged a negative 15%. But again, when we parse the numbers by budget size, the larger organizations are telling us, we're going to be down about 3% on average. Organizations under $1 million are expecting a much greater impact in their revenue pictures. And that final sort of a crew box at the bottom there says that 2 in 5 organizational leaders have reported to us that they are staying up at night wondering if their organization will be solvent at the end of 2021. And I just want to say that anytime you have a question, raise a hand, come off mute, give a yodel. We don't mind at all being interrupted, or you can put it in the chat where the smart people like Isis and Deirdre and Callan are monitoring. So just if I'm going too fast, give me a whoa, all right? So this is a little more detail on what kind of COVID relief nonprofits told us they received. This is a huge number, 68% receiving Paycheck Protection Program. And I have to say, I think it was hugely helpful in maintaining cash balances for a lot of nonprofits in the last 12 months. Others were able to access CARES funding through the government, through COJ, or directly through the federal government. The First Coast Relief Fund clearly made a big difference. Private philanthropic support. We know that donors stepped up and made additional gifts. A grant from the Community Foundation. They had a special grant program to close the gap for those organizations that had unexpected costs like technology, PPE, etc. So that's an important story, and one that I don't have a strong feeling about how the next chapter will play out. So let's look at a final indicator of financial health, and that is your cash on hand, your unrestricted cash reserves. About 39% of the folks who took the survey tell us that they have more than 6 months of unrestricted cash on hand. 31% say they have between 3 and 6 months, and 30% have fewer than or less than 3 months of cash on hand, with a 7.5% telling us they have less than 30 days cash on hand. Again, thinking about how many of the organizations that took this survey have accessed some kind of relief, this is, we're not out of the woods. Having some reserves is a huge leg up on your sustainability, and it'll be important for us to check in another year to find out where organizations are. So I'm sorry, Isis, did you have?
We've just got some questions coming into the chat.
Okay.
Some around, I see one from Bill around how did the 2020 drop affect nonprofit budget reserves? Any lessons learned here, ideas of developing future reserves? And Julia asked, how did the unrestricted cash reserve balance change in the last 6 months, if we have that data?
I asked the same question of Deirdre because she pulled up the statistics from 2017. We pulled this data. Of course, it's not the same organizations, but looking at cash reserves at and Deirdre, correct me, I think it was 2017, at the end of 2017, organizations had similar cash reserves. They might have been a little plumper on the far end on the plus 6 month side. Dee, is that correct?
That's right. Mommy.
I think she said yes. We're all translating for Deirdre these days. She has the worst sore throat, so it was very cruel of me to even ask her to speak. But yes, I think so. That seems to be relatively stable compared to other years. It's not a 6 month look, Julia, but compared to the 2017 look, which is a post-recessionary look, it looks the same. And I think, again, going back to the Paycheck Protection Act and other relief, it could have helped sustain those reserves. Bill, I hope that answers your question at the same time. And
sorry, we did have one other question around if we have an idea of how many folks that received PPP the first round are applying for the second round, if we have an idea.
So I have a what I call a flash poll out in, I just did a Survey Monkey question out to the Nonprofit Center 300 member execs. And as those polls number come in, I said, are you planning on applying for the second draw, and or do you not know, or do you need more information, or no? And it's trending strongly to yes. Above 60% are telling us yes or probably. So I think we're going to see if looking at the number of people who are in our survey had predicted less than 20, a 25% decrease in their revenues. And if they're qualifying according to the new standards with that decreased revenue or gross receipts, as they're calling it, then it seemed like a really a lifesaver to many organizations. And now that they've expanded that special pool for arts and cultural organizations, I think that's even more important. So yes, I think a good number will be reapplying for a second draw or maybe for the first time. So one of the questions we had is, it's a very squishy question, but it gets to the, like, how are you feeling? How do you think you're going to come out of 2021? And the execs who took the survey, 21% said, I'm pretty confident we're going to be fine. 65% were cautiously optimistic or cautionistic, and 12.3% said, I can't tell you. There's too many uncertainties and unknowns. We had 0 choosing gloomy, and almost 2% said very concerned. We're unsure if we'll still be around. What's interesting about that is that in that same survey, 42% of the execs reported that staying solvent through 2021 keeps them up at night. So at the Nonprofit Center, we sit around our now virtual big white table and talk about whether there is a optimism bias in the nonprofit sector. If you are worried about staying solvent through 2021, but you're also cautiously optimistic, I think there's room for that in the sector. But what we need to do is protect against both this rapid pace of change and the uncertainty, and our naturally positive outlook from clouding our perspectives about what needs to be done in terms of, and I think everything from budgeting to the topic today, and being strong advocates for the sector and for our own organizations. So to close out the information about the nonprofit sector, we also asked, tell us what resources you need. Tell us what you need. And top of the list at 50% was recruiting and training high quality board members. And also high in that list is external communications and advocacy. So I'm really delighted that all of you are here today. It's always been a focus of the nonprofit centers, but we really, we feel like these extraordinary times require us to up our game. And we're glad you're here to help hold us accountable and help us get direction for how we are going to be moving forward. So Isa, should we launch right into the Grantmaker survey?
Sorry, I couldn't come off mute. I think we're probably good to, unless anyone has any kind of burning questions that they'd want to ask right now, this may be a good chance to come off mute and ask a question.
And I think we're gonna give these slides to you. So if you're saying, I am not following what Rena's talking about, you'll have a chance to look at them in detail. So let's talk about this Grantmaker survey. We had 19 local private funders and philanthropies take this survey. We had originally thought the city of Jacksonville would be participating as well. They're going to actually, after they looked at the survey, they want to launch their own, and they've promised to share the data back with us. Because I think that understanding how governments are measuring impact and what they value in terms of practices for evaluation will be incredibly important in our advocacy work as well. So the grant makers we surveyed, I think I said there were 19 of them. So this was a multiple choice question. We asked them what did they fund and what kind of funding did they provide? So as you might expect, education, health, and human services were the dominant fields in which they made grants, but higher ed, arts and culture, and community support was also very, very prominent. And the most organizations told us that they made single year unrestricted operating grants. Many did multi-year unrestricted funding, and then single year project grants were also very popular, and multi-year project grants. Capacity building grants, only 6 organizations said that they were making capacity building organizational grants. And PRIs, or program related investments, is still very new here in this community, but some organizations are moving in that direction. And then many said they try to provide non-financial support to their grantees. We asked them in 2020, what were your practices in supporting nonprofits through COVID, and what will you continue in 2021? The green bar is 2020. So you can see that, immediately there's going to be a drop off from what they did in 2020 to what they did in 2021. So let's talk about what those practices were. In 2020, there was a lot of outreach, one-on-one communications. And I know that in my conversations with funders and with nonprofit leaders, this was really valuable. Just to have somebody call and check in on you was an important, not just a gesture, but important in those early months of the pandemic. And many, not quite half, will about half intend to continue that practice in 2021. Many extended the deadlines or changed the goals of their current grants to make modifications and allowances, and they increased their current grant funding or provided additional funding in order to mitigate the costs of the pandemic, or loosened restrictions on current grants, including reducing reporting requirements, and in some cases converting a restricted grant to operational grants so that nonprofits could choose to put the money where they most needed it. And there was even some instances of accelerating payments. In 2021, far fewer organizations intend to modify their grant deadlines or loosen those restrictions, although some still are. And when we had this similar revealed this morning with funders, and many reacted to this saying, I think when I filled this out, I thought 2021 was going to be better than it is. So I would not be surprised if the responses from September, October, and November are being rethought now, particularly now that we're sharing the results with them. So any questions here before I move on? Okay. We also wanted to know, how is it that you check or monitor your grantees' work? And that's the column on the left, and then evaluate whether to provide them support in the first place. So in the blue box is whether they're going to, what is the tools they use or techniques for deciding whether to support an organization. And they cited readiness as their top technique. Unfortunately, we didn't ask what readiness meant. And I think that's a great follow-up question for us to the philanthropy. So readiness, financial stability, and then the actual grant request are the top 3 ways that they judge whether to provide support. The importance of the alignment between the grant and the grant maker's goals or mission came in 4th. If you look at how they then monitor or measure how the grantee is making their goals, they said informal communications through check-ins and support calls, a final grant narrative. 3rd was actual quantitative outcomes, and finally, site visits. So exploring this a little bit more, what are the grant makers' approaches to measurement and evaluation? We asked them what was most useful, and they reiterated informal communication. 2nd was quantitative outputs. 3rd was site visits. And 4th is quantitative outcomes. What I find interesting about this list is that new thinking about supporting organizations in capacity building in general, and particularly in moving towards what's called trust-based philanthropy, is very data heavy on the front end in deciding where to allocate resources so that you can relax and not be data heavy on the back end. And I think as we try to also bring DEI into the conversation with funders, how is it you're making decisions? The informality of getting to know someone and making grants based on these informalities can also lead to, I think, biases in how we're making grants. And I know that all of us have felt sometimes that who you know is more important than what you do to receive funding. And so I think this awareness about how decisions are being made in the philanthropic community is an important thing to point out.
And Rena, we have a question in the chat of if we know if any local funders are interested in administrative equity.
I don't know what administrative equity is. And I also don't know the answer to that question, but can someone?
Julia, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, sorry. So I asked that. So it's just something that we're seeing in other places around the country where administrators are, where funders are backing off on some of the administrative requests, especially in smaller organizations. So it's a lot that you had alluded to, but I was curious if anybody had thought about it in that sense. And
the Community Foundation is, I think, in the process of evaluating some of those practices and forming some working groups towards analyzing their investment practices for smaller organizations. So beyond that, I can't tell you specifically, but it's, I think there are individual funders and family foundations that are also very interested in that. So what are the important topics for local grant makers? The top three are impact investing, capacity building for grantees, and weathering COVID-19. I will point out that only 3 of the 19 organizations said they, or maybe it was 6 of the 19 organizations said they did capacity building for grantees, at least grants for it. So I'm hopeful this is an increase in their interest in supporting capacity building. DEI is way up there, and you'll see, and Julia, this is to your point, trust philanthropy is also very important. So this is their forward thinking top priorities for the future: evaluation and measurement, partnerships and restructuring, and then even some capacity building for their own organizations is listed here. So we sort of line these up. It's a in some ways a false comparison, but going back to what nonprofits told us about what resources and capacity building would be most helpful to them, and comparing it to how grant makers said what is most important to them, we do see some alignment. If we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, it's on both lists. Weathering COVID-19 is on both lists. And if if grant makers are truly interested in building capacity for grantees and making operating or supporting grants that way, then I think that these other initiatives certainly could fall under them. So looking forward, what we're going to talk about here very briefly is information, and many of you contributed to this information, about key messages that we wanted to have in our quiver to help talk to influencers in the community, as well as to share with you, so that you can, if these jive with what you believe are important to the nonprofit sector. This is what we will use to inform our own work, our conversations with media, our conversations with funders like we did this morning. So just want to share these with you, make sure that they jive with what you are thinking and concerned with. And then we're going to switch to some advocacy priorities. So over and over again, we've heard, and we heard this over the summer, but it has continued, and if not increased in its intensity, this worry about team well-being. 57% of the executives that we surveyed, and this is their number one response, is that what keeps them up at night is they're worried about their team well-being. And this goes beyond just, the culture of the organization. This is manifested in how the virus is impacting their families. It's manifested in how it's affecting our constituents. It's about the pace and intensity of the level of change that so many organizations are dealing with. Importantly, I think this was a great quote we heard from someone, that their team just can't absorb anything else. That the last 11 months has just, it's just been so fast paced. There is so little continuity and so much change that truly organizations are afraid. I love this quote too. We're playing whack-a-mole and convulsively reacting. And when you're in this situation, it's extremely hard to have any consistent strategy that helps build organizational infrastructure. Coming out of the first months of the pandemic, I think we all walked around going, I can't believe this. Virtual work works. And there were so many gains in changing the way we delivered services and how we reduced barriers to whether it was healthcare or literacy training or mentoring. But after 11 months, we're really learning there are limits to it. And particularly when it comes to serving youth and children, there's just only so much that folks are feeling they can accomplish virtually when it comes to working with certain populations. And so, we're paying a lot of attention to that. And there's still a good need for, the survey said a third of the organizations are still struggling to respond and to a virtual workplace. So there are many folks that still have big technology gaps, as well as their constituencies having big technology gaps. So there was a feeling of freedom and flexibility and creativity in those first months from the pandemic. We're doing things differently. We have to, but we're finding a way and we're being innovative and creative. And now we're focusing on how do we integrate that innovation model into our post-pandemic work. While 48% of executives tell us they really worry about having the tools and funds to adapt. Change is still coming. So how is it that we're going to have enough resources to keep up with this pace of change and to not go back to the old normal? So we all know this, when times are hard, it's important to go back to the core mission. And organizations coming out of the recession told us this, organizations in the first few months of the pandemic told us this, and they continue to tell us this. This is what we're doing really well. We're going back to mission. We're tightening up. But there's been a permanent cost to some nonprofits that it is not their choice to be closed or to be off mission. It's just what's happened with the pandemic. And we expect that some will never recover. And this goes back to that nightmare that is keeping up some execs that 42% tell us that staying solvent through 2021 is what keeps them up at night. So this quote is great. We're trying to stay relevant, but it's not an easy task. Our biggest concern is the future. And we don't know what we will be able to produce programs in the spring or if we'll be able to have our fundraiser in the fall. So capacity issues continue to haunt organizations. And this was the, we talked about this so much in the working group that the message is not, hey, we're open for business. It's, hey, we are essential to business, that nonprofits are essential to the economy, to reigniting the economy, to benchmarking our normal civic engagement. And you've told us over and over again, we need the community to understand our work and support it. So now we're going to switch to issue focus. Is everybody with me? Can I go? Okay. And I want to, before we launch into this, this was a quote from one of the survey participants. It's really hard to look ahead to advocacy when we are really just trying to stay afloat. And we feel you. And things aren't going to get a lot easier. But what I would answer to that is advocacy is about development. Advocacy and policy work is about sustainability. And so before we dive into what you all enumerated as your top priorities for advocacy from the survey, let's just talk a little bit about what the nonprofit sector and center has focused on as challenging forecast for 2021. State and local budget cuts, a federal government in transition, 10 million plus unemployed, unresolved racial conflicts. Shannon, I'm sure you are completely aware of this, but the evictions and foreclosures is just a cliff that keeps getting closer and closer. And then service demand increase and how that's related to these other issues. Our civic and cultural organizations are struggling, and we have a rollout of a $15 minimum wage. So these are all important things for us to work to put into context for our organizations. So with that, I think, am I turning it over to you, Isis?
Yes, yeah, and we have about 8 minutes left, so we're going to spend a little bit of time hearing from you. So we know we just threw a lot of information at you. So what you're seeing in front of you right now are some themes around the advocacy priorities that the respondents to our survey listed out. And so we had a lot of different responses, not all the same, but we tried to kind of theme them up for you. So what I'd love for everyone to do is just take a few seconds, a minute or so, to look at this list. And if you feel comfortable putting into the comment or coming off mute, first, we'd love to hear do you see your advocacy focus here? Do you see an issue here that is going to directly impact your organization that you know you will need to focus on, whether through programming or your advocacy platform? And if not, we'd love to hear what that issue is. So just love to hear from anyone that wants to share. And go ahead and come off mute or put into the chat. So Denise, I see environmental protection and environmental justice, definitely. Definitely. Minimum wage implementation, definitely something that we're also following very closely. And if anyone wants to come off mute and kind of expand a little bit on what they're thinking, how they're looking to adapt, we'd love to hear from you.
I think, this is Sarah from Big Brothers. I think one of the things, and maybe it's tucked into a few of these, is equity and access. So we did a great job of sourcing laptops for 240 of our kiddos, still didn't solve the problem. So thankfully with Comcast, we have Internet Essentials, but it still elevates that component of there's just a real lack in equity, and what does that inform for some of our people who, with everything being so virtual, don't have that same access point.
think that's great, Sarah. And I think earlier this week received, wait, it's only Tuesday, it must have been last week, an invitation from, I think it was the Regional Planning Council on internet access. And so I'll try and find that and share that link out with you all, because I think this is a huge issue for the future. I mean, access in general, but technology and internet access, certainly.
Absolutely. So I'd also love to hear if there are any resources, information that would be helpful to you all moving forward, and whether expanding your existing advocacy platform and practices, or just developing it to begin with. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, just specifically about the volunteerism piece, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Trainings opening minds up to frontline staff of how to think different. I mean, yes, we can't do this or that because of COVID, but that's not going to play any longer. We have to adapt or we won't be here. So if senior volunteers might not be possible, opening minds up to other alternatives and just different things like that, training in general to open up frontline staff who manage programs about how to look at different alternatives and cultivate them.
Thank you so much, Lori, definitely. And we're just taking some notes. This is really great. Does anyone have anything else before we move on, whether on if they want to expand on an advocacy focus that they didn't see listed, or on a specific resource or information that they would like to have noted? Okay, so I'm going to move on then. So what you see in front of you here is some information on how to stay connected moving forward. For those of you that aren't familiar with FNA, the Florida Nonprofit Alliance, we highly recommend joining them. I'll be sending out more information on all of these resources in the follow-up email, but definitely if you're not connected to them, go ahead and join them and get signed up to their newsletter. The Nonprofit Gateway. Nonprofit Gateway, for those who are familiar, is through the city of Jacksonville. Again, I'll send a link on how to access that. We also have a few programming opportunities. So we have our Powerful Advocacy Essentials that we offer every year. That's more of our kind of fundamental introduction to kind of how to, the importance of advocacy and how to integrate it into your organization. But we also obviously have our Jessie Advocacy series here that you're a part of. And these conversations are going to be a lot more like the ones we've had today. They're going to be high level, big picture conversations that are impacting the nonprofit center. And if check out the Nonprofit Center website if you haven't yet. I don't even think I know everything that's on our website. There's so much information on there. And find a coalition and network that aligns with the work that you're trying to do and your advocacy focus. There's a lot of ones out there. If you're not familiar, reach out to us, and there may be one that we're familiar of, or that we can connect you to another organization that's connected to one. So any questions on those, I'm happy to answer. But if not, I think we can move forward. So any questions? I know we have a couple minutes left. Any questions for Rena or Deirdre? We can speak for Deirdre. Okay. If not, feel free to put it into the chat also. So we do have a few upcoming events. I'm not going to go into all of them. We do have the final event around our 2020 Compensation and Benefits Report series coming up next week around developing a compensation plan. We also had our promoting DEI through better compensation and our CEO performance evaluation. Those were two trainings we had through this series. So if you're interested in those, I'm happy to share information on that. We have our essentials around nimble budgets, our implicit bias and equitable teams, and our second Jessie Advocacy series event that's going to be on April 30th around key policy updates from the first 100 days of the Biden administration. That's going to be a really great, fun event. So definitely all of these events you can find on our website to register and stay informed on. But I think that's all.
Sarah's got her hand up.
Oh yeah, Sarah.
I did have a question. I put it in the chat, but it might have filtered down. Was curious, when you spoke with the funders or were gaining their perspective, Was it covered what their perspective of an agency using things like PPP or CARES Act support was, or that shows a negative connotation around sustainability, or if they thought it was a positive overall?
I'm going to have to go rogue here and just give you anecdotal feedback because we didn't specifically ask that question. But every funder that I have talked to thought it was an appropriate and smart thing to pursue. They did not see it as double dipping or, that it was understood to be a reasonable and business-like approach to sustaining your organization.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other last minutes while we're wrapping up? And I see that Anna put the survey into the chat. Please, 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 before you log off, at least click on it so you have access to it. Your feedback, as you see today, is very important to us to make sure that we're bringing you the right resources and information. So any final questions? Okay, if not, thank you so much for being here today and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And you'll be getting the follow-up information email with all this information. So thank you again.
Thank you all. Be well.